So it's not exciting, it's not dull, it's not kind of pleasant, it's not unpleasant, but it's very comfortable, and it's a suitable place to put your attention to help bring the mind down. The mind has the quality that can be observed in meditation, that it will take on the quality of the thing that it's perceiving. So if you are perceiving something that you dislike, your mind will start to take on the characteristic of disliking, anger, hatred. If you put your mind onto something that you like, your mind will start to take on the characteristic of greed, attachment, or wanting. You can play about with that. Think about food that you like to eat, and then your mouth starts to salivate, and then you start thinking, well, maybe I'll skip out a little early and go and buy some pizza. Or put your mind onto something you dislike. See how that starts to create a reaction in your body, in your heart. So we look at this process as a meditator and observe that the mind changes according to what you are perceiving. Then the insight should start to occur that if my mind changes according to the object of perception, then I should start to take responsibility for what kind of things I'm bringing into my mind. So in order to gain the power, the ability to change what's in the mind, to determine what things I'm going to bring into perception, you start to watch this process of object of perception and reaction of attachment or greed or hatred or delusion. By watching this process, it gives you the power to step out of the process of the mind perceiving things. Now, generally speaking, for ordinary people, from the moment you get up, from the moment you go to sleep, you spend the whole day perceiving things, usually with thinking, but also with eating and walking and singing or listening to music, watching YouTube, feeding the cat. You have to spend the whole day like focusing on one thing. So what is it like to put down this process of continually observing things, of continually having objects of perception, of the mind being pulled out, moving around? So that's why we use the breath as a nice object that we can use for meditation. You make the determination that all other things that I could think of, I could perceive, I'm going to put that down and I'm going to come back to just the breath. As you watch the breath, follow the breath, it will give you a good indicator, a good barometer for what your psyche is doing, what your heart is feeling. If you are nervous or anxious, you will tend to breathe in the chest. If you are fairly relaxed or comfortable, you'll tend to breathe from the abdomen. You can see that whether your breath is deep or shallow, whether it is quick or whether it is slow, whether it is jagged or whether it's regular. The breath will give you a good indicator for what's really happening in your psyche, in your mind. So the meditator usually will train themselves to be familiar and close to the breathing. So when you do this in meditation, you put the mind onto the breath. You can feel it at the tip of the nose, or you can feel it as it runs through the body, or you can feel it in the abdomen. Personally, I would recommend feeling it inside the body, either following it up and down through the body, or just feeling the body as a whole while the breath passes by. Now, because the breath isn't absorbing, what happens is your mind will automatically look for patterns. So if the mind knows what's going to happen, it knows the pattern, then it says, okay, in, out, right, I've got that. It goes in and goes out. So I'll go off and think about something else and just pretend that I'm still looking at the breath. And then you find that 10 minutes has gone by, half an hour has gone by, and you thought you were meditating on the breath, but actually you've been lost in thinking. So the insight starts to arise. How come I don't know where my mind is? This should be the insight that starts to come. So you tighten up the meditation. I want to know clearly when my mind is with the breath, where I've told it to go, and when my mind is off with something else. Then you find that you think, okay, I'm really going to follow the breathing, but it is a bit boring, so the part of the mind that wants excitement, wants something to engage with, it will tell you, okay, this thought is really important, I need to think this thought. And that's what we call attachment. And when in Buddhism we say let go of attachments, we don't mean that you don't feed the cat or you don't pay your mortgage. What we mean is when you see something coming to the mind that really wants to pull your attention, that lure, that pull, that's attachment that we're talking about. So you train yourself to give up that attachment, to say, no, I will think about things at a later date, I think about things when I need to, but now this is my time for the breath. So you train yourself one breath at a time to continually let go of whatever that is that's calling for your attention and bring your mind back to the breath. The good meditator, or the good meditation, is not so much that you are just completely absorbed on the breath as like a trance. The good meditation is when you know exactly when your mind is wandering away, because that's mindfulness. That's actually seeing present moment what your mind is doing. Most people don't get to see that. They're just caught up in the mind without being mindful. So to know when the mind is moving away from the breath, when it wants to move away from the breath, when there's some subject coming up that's attachment, then you see that and you know it. Be willing to let it go and come back to the breathing. For those of you a bit more practiced with this, you can at some point switch your attention no longer on the breath, but on whether you're mindful or not. So there is a point of knowing and a point of not knowing. When I say knowing, it's a self-awareness that here I am here in this body at this moment, and I know what the mind is doing as an object, not as a subject. And I know when I'm starting to lose that and get caught up in some line of thinking or memory or thought or sometimes sound around you or feeling in the body. Just come back to that wakefulness. That can be your meditation object. At this point, you should be still aware of the body, and you can be aware of the breath running through the body, but it will be a generalized body awareness and not specific. So you're not trying to clamp the mind down onto an object and hold it. You're simply knowing, am I sitting here with awareness, present moment awareness of the body, or is my mind being pulled out to some kind of sound or thought or memory or feeling? That wakefulness, that mindfulness itself is the meditation. If you can hone in on that, you simply know when you are shaking out of it and losing the awareness and when it's coming back. The meditation at this point will appear bright. It's not lights as in a visualization of lights, but the body will appear to be bright, will appear to be large, and may well start to feel quite pleasant to be in, even if you have aching knees or aching back. That's when your mind is specifically going out to that feeling. When it's just with mindfulness, it will start to appear as pleasant. If that happens, move into the pleasant body feeling, just simple body awareness, and that feeling you can enjoy. It's not rapturous or beautiful like eating a nice food, but it's gentle, it's mindful, it's bright, it's clear, and it's present. You may feel the body go very large or the body go very small. Remember Alice in Wonderland when she drank the potion and she felt so big she couldn't fit in the room? It's okay, we haven't quite started yet. That's an experience in meditation. The body starts to feel really large. At other points, the body can start to disappear, and you're not even quite sure where you are. At that point, you need to increase your mindfulness a little bit. So these are some of the experiences. This is what we do with the breathing. Hope I've given enough indicators. So we're going to sit together for 20 minutes or so. So settle yourself into a comfortable position. Any way that you can sit is okay. But the cross-legged position, long term, will pay dividends if you can get accustomed to it. Put your mind onto the breath as it runs through the body. Approach with the attitude of enjoying the breath. It's peaceful, it's simple, it's neutral in feeling. If you follow the feeling of the breath, it actually runs down the center of the body, just in front of the spine. In fact, it goes all the way to the seat. The physical sensation of the breath, prana. Be willing to return attention to the breath 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times. Remember, the meditation is not just to be absorbed in the breathing, but to know when the mind is wandering away. The quality we are developing is mindfulness. Knowing exactly what the mind is doing, where attention is moving, and being willing to let go of whatever it is and re-center your attention, training yourself breath by breath to be content, to be peaceful, to be satisfied with just the breath. So make your mind bright, as still as you can. And call into the mind the perception of loving kindness we call metta, a universal loving kindness for all world beings. You may think of or remember people or pets which arouse the feeling of love. Once that feeling arises, hold on to the feeling itself and use that well-wishing, offering it out to all world beings. Those you know, those you don't know, those near, those far away, those you agree with and you disagree with, those beings who are seen or unseen, even those who have hurt you or abused you, without thinking of the things that they've done. You offer this loving kindness, universal well-wishing. May all beings be happy. May all beings be peaceful. May all beings be free from suffering. Bringing this into the meditation, combined with the breath, the brightness of mind, radiating out from your center. This is what we call Sobhanacitta, beautiful mind. The more often you can call this mind into being, arouse it, stimulate it, the easier it is for this mind state to arise in the future. So make your meditation beautiful. Set forth this beautiful intention and see mindfully the effect that it has on you. So for the last 2 minutes of the meditation, really try to arouse mindfulness, bright, clear, steady, well-wishing, radiating. That beautiful, clear receptivity, willingness to put all things down. Sabbe buddha balapatta pattekanancha yang balang arahantanancha tejena rakang bandami sabbhaso sabba buddha nubhavena sattasoti bhavantu te sabbe buddha balapatta pattekanancha yang balang arahantanancha tejena rakang bandami sabbhaso Sabba dhamma nubhavena satta soti bhavantu te Sabbe buddha balapatta pachekanancha yang balang arahantanancha tejena rakang bandami sabbaso Sabba sangha nubhavena satta soti bhavantu te. Okay, relax your posture. Okay, so I want to give you some hardcore Dharma. So for those who are new, I may lose you a little bit, but that's okay. Because I have seen and heard a lot of stuff that gets put around that people claim to be Buddhism and isn't. I saw one picture of the Buddha. There's a quotation from the Buddha, and it said, may all beings remember to subscribe and hit the little bell icon. But people do, they write all kinds of things, often nice things, and ascribe it to put a picture of the Buddha, and it's not from the Buddha. A lot of teachers teaching pseudo-psychology. I was quite amazed when I studied psychology as a monk in the monks' university, just how much of the things that are taught are actually psychology. I heard teachers talk about the ego. I never saw the ego mentioned before Sigmund Freud. Apparently it did exist in a couple of texts somewhere, but and this monk saying, let go of the ego. I'm pretty sure the Buddha never talked about ego. You don't even know what you mean by ego. There's a bunch of different ways that the term is used. So there was a teaching of this is an original teaching, so I make no apologies for the way that it goes. And there was a man, and somebody stopped him and he said, I've been to see the Buddha. And the man says to him, well, what do you think? I've heard about this guy, what do you think? And he said, he's the best of all teachers. He said, now how can you be sure of that? And he said, well, I can't really be sure, but it's like a person who goes out into the forest and sees the enormous footprint of a bull elephant and knows that this footprint must be the greatest of all footprints, must belong to a bull elephant. He said, in the same way, I've heard this teaching and I am positive that this is the right teaching. So the man thinks, well, sounds quite good. He goes to see the Buddha. And the Buddha says to him, if you don't know, the Buddha was Indian, in northern India, a very small kingdom called the Sakyan kingdom. He had been like a minor prince. He'd left his home and family and gone out to become an ascetic, a monk. It's where the shaved head and the robes come from. These predate Buddhism. And he'd wandered off in search of what he had understood to be called the amata. Now, mata is the same word that we have for morbid or death. And amata means deathless. So there's somewhere in the psyche or universe there is something that is deathless or immortal or unchangeable. So you can think of it as like an unchangeable essence of your psyche, of your spirit, your soul. But in fact, the unchangeable aspect is what you appear in and disappear from. So it is actually larger than the self. So this man, he went to see this Indian prince now teaching in the forests in northern India. And the Buddha said that teaching on the elephant's footprint is right, but not complete. He said people come and they hear about Dharma. They hear about karma, that we live according to the results of our deeds, that there is a moral right in the universe and a moral wrong, and that aligning ourselves to the moral right is something that purifies the spirit. Visuddhimagga is called the path of purification. And so people become inspired with this idea of purifying the mind, the psyche. What does that feel like? What is impurity in your mind? What does purity feel like? How do you do it? So such people settle down and decide to take up a practice. Very often would go and ordain as a samana, as a monk with the Buddha. In so doing, if they had not heard that there was a path of purification and a goal at the end of it, they would not engage in a practice. This is quite important. For me, myself, I never knew about a path of practice. I never knew that there was a goal to the holy life. I'd heard about Christian monks, but I thought they made Calvados and brandy and things, which is what they do in Europe. Sounds like a good way, might be a good way to do it. Shortcut to enlightenment. I didn't know about it, and I've told this story before, some people know, but I was with my father in the van, we were delivering some produce, and there was a man meditating in his garden as we drove past, and I'd never seen or heard about it. I said to my father, "What's he doing?" And my father said, "He's wasting his time." So if you don't know about it, I'm really looking at Thai culture, and in Thai culture they know about this. They know about an enlightenment or something, there is a goal to the holy life. You might not know what it is or how to describe it, but if you didn't know about it or hear about it, then you wouldn't engage in a practice for it. So Buddha also had heard about this, the amata, before he set out in search of it. So that was the first criteria. It's very important to have heard about this and for it to shake the spirit, samvega. Buddha said there are gods and men who, when they hear about putting an end to desire, their hearts do not react. So this idea of putting an end to desire, which is an interesting statement, of reaching this enlightenment, this purification of mind, should shake or interest, spark somewhere within you. If it doesn't, then you don't need to practice. This is not a proselytizing religion. We don't want people to believe or to follow. It's entirely up to people if they want to or they don't, and many people don't, and that's fine. But for the people that are interested, this path should be available for them. So the next thing that they do is, after going to the forest and deciding to engage in this meditation with the Buddha, this is a sutta, so it refers to the time and place 2,500 years ago. And they practice the contentment with little. So for monks, that means we have contentment with 4 refuges. So with enough medicine to keep us alive and healthy. In the scriptures, this medicine is made from fermented urine. So we've updated that one. But the principle is there. If you can, enough to stay alive and healthy is enough. Clothes, we have enough to ward off the feeling of stinging insects, of sun, of cold, enough in order to keep us healthy and help us practice with the holy life. With lodging, simple lodging is enough to keep us dry, to keep us safe, to ward off the sun, the insects. And with alms food, the food that is collected, whether it's the food you like or you dislike, we don't pay attention, it's enough to keep you alive and keep you healthy. So these 4 requisites, he said, you make yourself, you practice contentment with 4 requisites. To which, in the modern day, we have to add a 5th requisite, and that's Wi-Fi. But practicing contentment with little, then one practices the precepts. So you give up the killing of animals. You give up the staff and the rod that kills or controls animals. So that animals around you will live peacefully with you and you will live peacefully with them. Giving up the killing of animals, one dwells with compassion and metta, loving kindness for all well-beings. Giving up stealing, one decides to engage in a behavior that is trustworthy, that is beautiful, that is conducive to living with a community and with friends, that is not lying or cheating or trying to get things or being based on greed. You give up taking that which is not given. You give up wrongful sexual conduct. So that's sexual conduct that's based on greed, based on getting what you want, that you give up. What society or what people or your family consider to be wrongful conduct, that you give up, so that you are one of beautiful conduct. Or indeed, if you are a monk, you're one who is celibate. You give up wrong speech, lying speech that is designed to deceive and designed to foster and foment greed or hatred. You give that up. Divisive speech that is designed to divide people, set people against each other, giving that up. You use speech that is given at the right time, that is used to de-escalate, that is used to bring people together and create harmony. Giving up gossip or useless or frivolous speech. You speak only what has use and what has benefit. Drugs, drink, alcohol. One gives up the use of narcotics and substances that cause the loss of mindfulness. I have a funny story about that if you want to know about it later. But so that one is practicing to live live with wakefulness, with mindfulness, with care and attention. In Thai is called ya Brahmat. 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 Don't be careless. There's a story of Lumpur Kun, who's a famous Thai monk. You'd often see him sat squatting down on his haunches, and he'd have a big cigar of field tobacco, and he'd smoke these cigars. After he became famous, he was like in his 70s, he actually gave up smoking because he didn't want it to be a bad example for people to follow. But you see him sometimes in this posture. And somebody asked him for a katha, which is like a mantra or a stanza to ward off evil. So you recite this mantra and it will keep evil things away from you. So he wrote this mantra down, so the story goes, on a piece of paper, and he gave it to them, and the person went off and opened it up, and it said, Ya Brahma Deoblop Pai. Don't be careless and you will be safe. My Thai okay there? I don't speak much Thai these days. So taking up the precepts then is a way of living carefully and wakefully and in a trustworthy way, and you gain a brightness or an uprightness to your psyche, to your being. It steadies you out, and you can see this with people that are careless, that do lie and cheat and steal and kill and addicted to drink and drugs. You can see when you look at them that there's this shakiness, this instability within people who behave like that. And there's a beauty to the people that behave with restraint. So restraint is a big part of Buddhism. So the Buddha says, once you are living with this restraint and uprightness and self-confidence that comes from that, you practice the guarding of the sense doors. When you see something with the eye, you don't allow your consciousness to go out and get attached to that thing that you can see. If you do, then you spark bhava, or becoming, which means your mind becomes consciously engaged with that thing. You hold your mind in restraint with regard to the eye. When your ear hears something, you don't get attached to the signs and features of that sound. Do I like it? Do I dislike it? Do I want it? Do I not want it? Do I want more of it? Is it important or not important? Your consciousness can go out and get engaged with that sound. This idea of going out is very important in forest dharma in Thailand. When you taste something with the tongue, feel something with the body, when you smell something with the nose, and when you think something with the mind, when a thought occurs to you, don't get attached to the signs and features of that thought. If you do, your mind will become engaged and attached to it. You dwell with restraint with regard to thoughts that arise. So this was called the guarding of the sense doors, a very crucial part of the practice. Where does the mind go if you're not allowing it to get caught up with any of your six senses? It just starts to become self-aware. It's held in an equipoise. Important to note, because this is not getting absorbed in an object. This is an equipoise that is mindful and is very clear. If you practice this, you can see clearly when people are not in this equipoise and when they are. If you're on a retreat, you can usually see quite clearly people who are thinking or concentrating too hard, because they're kind of meditating like this with their face screwed up. It's not an equipoise. This is very gentle. It's like years ago in Britain, there was the Britain's strongest man. His name was Jeff Capes. Does anyone here remember Jeff Capes? He won all these competitions for being the strongest man. He wasn't even that big compared to others. But anyway, he had a hand like a bunch of bananas. And he raised budgerigars, little tiny budgies, and he'd hold them in his hand, like this big hand that could crush a coconut, and he would hold these little tiny budgerigars. That's kind of how the mind is in this state. The mind can get more and more powerful the more you concentrate it on. The more you hold attention in restraint, the more the power of the mind grows. The more you allow attention to run around here and there and you get more scattered, more uncentered, and feel more drained. You should know this even on a basic level in your daily life. If you're really busy and you've got things going on, it drains your energy. At other times when you can hold yourself in some restraint, or find some kind of something to center you or calm, or you do some yoga, your mind starts to become centered and more stable. So you practice the guarding of the sense doors. This was the practice that was given. Practicing the guarding of the sense doors, one practices mindful awareness of small movements. So that is when you stand up or when you sit down, you do so mindfully. When your hand reaches forward or reaches back, you do so mindfully with full awareness of what my hand is doing. When the hand reaches into the alms bowl to fetch the food, you know my hand is going into the alms bowl. You know what it is touching, retrieving. You know what you are eating. Practicing mindfulness of refined movements. You know when the foot is going forward. You know when you are sitting down. Do you ever notice this? When people go and sit down in chairs, I notice this a lot. Because we have a lot of meditators come and they sit down mindfully. And then other people come who are new and they sit down and vroom into their seat. Men and women sit down differently, have you noticed? Women sit down, come position themselves and sit down kind of with an elegance. Men kind of sit down, legs open, looking around. Be mindful, be mindful. In the sutta it also says when you're going to the bathroom, urinating or defecating, you do so mindfully, with clear awareness, you know what it is that you are doing. So guarding of the sense doors, the first meditation practice. Mindfulness of movement of the body is the next one. Then, having got these two practices going, having eaten, having settled the body into an acceptable position and place at the root of a tree, at the foot of a mountain, in a cave, in a desert, or somewhere quiet, somewhere clean and quiet, meditation room. One settles the mind onto the breath, follows the breath or other meditation object, following it clearly and mindfully, knowing where the mind is. One focuses the mind into attention. You give up the agitation of the mind, developing the stillness of the mind. You give up the greed in the mind, focusing on the non-desiring of the mind. You give up the ill will or hatred of the mind, dwelling in compassion. You give up restlessness, dwelling percipient of light. You give up the doubting in the mind and the practice, because the mind will be purifying right in front of you, and you can see without doubt exactly when the mind is purifying and not purifying. In this way, one practices meditation until the first jhana is attained to, the jhana being a concentrative, meditative absorption. Some of the qualities of this is you will feel the thinking, or the vitakka vichara is called. In Thai is vitok, but usually vitok gangwon means like to worry. But in the Pali, vitok comes from the term vitakka. And vitakka means to throw. So it's to throw your attention onto something. And vichara means to hold the attention with something. Vitakka and vichara mean your mind is sustained and applied attention. Sustained and applied attention. This is entering into the first jhana, or the first absorption state. Don't expect thunderbolts and lightning. Don't expect a sudden kind of thing. And often you think, well, was that the first jhana or wasn't that the first jhana? But there is a very definite change of mode or change of being. That with all activities you have in the world, the mind shakes, moves, attaches, thinks, moves back, feels, and at this point stabilizes. And often you think, well, what do I do then? Because it feels empty. Because you are used to putting attention onto things and engaging with things. And this is very hard to stay with because it's not engaging with anything. Nonetheless, you can feel that change of mode. You can feel it often through the body as a kind of centering. Sometimes you may have the feeling that your body is sat a couple of feet away from you. Has anyone had this feeling? Sometimes your body seems like it's sitting somewhere else, and you even open your eyes to check that you're not over there. So this is actually going into the psychic bodies where they're unaligned because you haven't stabilized the applied and sustained thinking. When it stabilizes, the feeling of the body aligns, and you feel yourself, and you know yourself sitting there. Rapture can start to arise, piti, and is a feeling of brightness or energy can start to come through the body. Bear in mind that a lot of these things don't happen in sequence. They're laid out in sequence as a map, but they may get switched around. You may feel the rapture and the concentration to begin with, and then you lose your mindfulness and fall asleep. So these things can get switched around, but we're placing them in order. That the Buddha gave in this sutta, this was actually the way that he taught. The rapture can arise. If that happens, you can move into the rapture. It's an energization and a beautiful feeling of pleasant feeling. But after a while, that dies down, and you're left with equanimity. That is, the mind is still, is bright, is very clear, but it's no longer feeling pleasant or unpleasant feelings. This, ironically, feels pleasant. Pleasant as attached to sensor objects is one thing. So ice cream is pleasant and pizza is pleasant. Betty Davis, pleasant to listen to if you like funk. Rap music, unpleasant to listen to. All things are pleasant or unpleasant. It does depend on you more than the object, but there is a pleasant that comes from absorbing in an object of perception. But there is a pleasantness that comes from not absorbing in anything, in this beautiful stillness that lies beyond the rapture. So this pleasantness of equanimity or equipoise can start to arise. So these are the jhanas, the absorption, concentration states. And the Buddha said, if you attain to one of these, then you have seen the elephant's footprint. Then you have seen the actual footprint of the Dharma, and you've known it directly for yourself. The other things before, those were the preliminary things. So, having to attain to these jhanas, and note, those of you who know Dharma, this is the first 4 jhanas, not the second 4 jhanas. Those are not mentioned in the sutta. If you don't know what that means, don't worry, it's a technical thing. Having attained to the jhanas, then one exits from the meditation with the mind bright, purified, steady, wieldy, and ready for work. One turns the attention to the memory of past lives. 1 life, 10 lives, 100 lives. Seeing, here I was born in this life or that life. Here I was born with this trade. Here I was born with this kind of family. Here I used to eat this kind of food. Then I died from that life and was born in another one. Remembering of the past lives. If you know Dharma, you might note this is the experience that the Buddha had when on the night of his enlightenment. So the day he finally attained to the Amata, the deathless. The first thing that he attained to, in the first watch of the night, if you know the story, he sat underneath the Bodhi tree all night, and he had these 3 attainments. First one is remembering past lives. Second one was seeing the arising and passing away of beings in heavens and hell according to karma. So using the psychic body and seeing heaven and hell and seeing what beings are born in what state and what they had done to be born in that state. A lot of people these days try to wash this part of the teaching out of Dharma. They say, well, I don't believe in past lives, or was it real or is it not real? Well, as to that I can't say, but I can say this was the teaching. That is categorically true. This was what he taught, repeatedly. So you see the arising and passing away of beings and see that the karma that they do is leading to their rebirths. And then in the third watch of the night, he attained to the end of the asava. Now the asava are the outflowings. So the mind flows out. Remember I said earlier when it flows out to an object? The mind flows out to object because of ignorance, because it doesn't know, the mind has forgotten and doesn't know how to purify and be with itself. So it continually goes out seeking things to be aware of. It goes out because of ignorance. It goes out pulled by sense desires. It goes out of a need to engage with things in the objects of perception and the world around. And sometimes he added a fourth, he said it goes out because of views and opinions. So the end of the outflow, the end of the asava means the mind no longer goes out to anything. It is with itself, it's with its own nature, its original nature, and it is perfected. He said at that point, then enlightenment is known, you've done what needed to be done, and you are now an arahant and a fully enlightened being. That's how it happened for the Buddha. I should mention that some people do in fact practice these 3 powers or insights, but not yet become a fully enlightened arahant. So you still have to work through your karma. And so in this sutta the Buddha does say, according to one of the translations, he says, now at this point, if you do not become one of the arahants, you have completed, you have done everything that needed to be done. So as much as the mind can do or practice, you have done that at this point. So then enlightenment will occur in its own time. So this was the way the Buddha laid out the entire practice, from start to finish, from hearing about Dharma all the way to getting to enlightenment. Notice there's no mention of egos in there. There's no... a lot of the things that people teach about or claim to be parts of Buddhism are not in there. But there is a clear methodical pathway to the purification of mind. It's called Visuddhi Magga. Visuddhi means purification, and Magga means the path, or mak in Thai. So, this is what the Dharma is. Hardcore Dharma, original teachings, what Sakyamuni Buddha actually taught. Note, many parts of this path can be changed and interchanged. Sometimes you attain to concentration, but you haven't done much much guarding of the sense doors. Other times you can do guarding of the sense doors and suddenly you arrive at a very purified state of mind. These things don't go in a sequence, but they're laid out in a sequence. They're laid out in degrees of purification of the mind. All of them, you may note, require a self-possession or a taking hold, an ordering of your house, which is quite different to the way many teachers are teaching, let everything go, let everything be. No, it was a very energetic, I think Indian practice. You know, Indians are quite kind of hardcore. When they believe something, they believe so thoroughly and firmly that grasp onto it and don't allow any other practice. It was rather different to Chinese Buddhism, which became much more kind of earthy and more Taoist and mixed in Confucianism and other things. So that's the path, that is our practice, that's what we're doing. Clear? Clear as mud, but we covered the ground. The confusion made my head spin round. So, I want to encourage you all to take up a practice and apply yourself, order your house, bring yourself into self-possession, self-control, and take up a practice. It may take a lifetime, it may take 2 lifetimes, it may take 5 lifetimes, but you don't know how long you've been doing this. The fact that there's an interest that is sparked tends to mean that you've done it before in the past. Certainly was that way for me. As soon as I came across Dharma, it felt so totally familiar to me that I'm absolutely sure that I have done it in the past. So much so, I actually went for a past life regression with a past life regressive therapist in England, and she regressed me to a past life where I was a monk. I think it's full of nonsense, but I can tell you about it if you like. I'm very dubious about that myself, but please note that teaching of past lives is a genuine, real part of original Buddhism. Okay, we just have a short amount of time. If there are any questions or anything, if I said something that sparked a feeling or sparked a reaction within you that you would like to... Yeah, if you speak up, you won't need the microphone.
Oh, that's fine, yeah.
Okay.
It's a practical question that might be useful to others here. Will you be holding a three-set ceremony anytime soon?
No.
Do you not do them at school?
We do in the temples, so you can do this like at any time in any temple. Precepts and refuges. So usually you prepare the sankatan, the yellow buckets. I tell you many things about yellow buckets. And you make the offering, and then you take the precepts and you take the refuges. And that's a way that one can become a Buddhist kind of thing, or recommit to being a Buddhist. Some people like to meditate without identifying as a Buddhist. It should be clear from the path as I outlined it. It's not a matter of belief. However, as a matter of practicality, we do have a whole bunch of practices like bowing, like chanting, like taking precepts, and coming together as a group to meditate together, which are ways to keep re-cementing a practice, because it's hard to do alone. If it's easy for you to do alone, go to a forest or a mountain or a cave and get on with it. Yeah, most of us, including myself, that's why I ordained as a monk. I kind of knew Buddhism, I knew everything, not everything, I knew what the teachings were. But to do it by myself, at the time I was working as a chef. It's a kind of full-on job, high-stress job. I couldn't maintain a solid, regular practice and live lay life. Some people can. Depends on your karma, depends on your psyche. Yeah.
I would like to ask if the teaching of Buddha about atta, it has the concept that goes to ego.
So the question is about ego and atta. Atta is self, and the teaching in Buddhism is anatta, which is non-self. Firstly, nobody's quite sure what they mean by ego, because there are several different kinds. Usually when people say ego, they mean self-aggrandizement. So someone is egotistical. Yeah, someone like Donald Trump springs to mind. You like him or you hate him, doesn't matter. But he has a big ego. Nigel Farage in Britain, he has a big ego. He might be right, he might be wrong, but he's full of himself. That's one ego. Another ego is like an self-identity. So like myself as an ego identity. You know, what kind of person am I? Am I the way that I relate to myself? Ego in psychology meant something completely different. Ego is a good thing in psychology. It's something that you develop. So your id works on the pleasure principle. I like, I don't like, I want. An animalistic reaction of the mind that just wants to get what it wants. Whereas the ego is something that works on the wisdom principle, and it can delay gratification. So you're supposed to develop the ego and have a strong ego in order to have self-control. And that's what a good human being is in Freudian psychology. So in psychology, the ego is a good thing. And the idea of being without the ego means that you're just an animal. So that doesn't make any sense in psychology at all. So we need to be clear when we say ego, what ego are we talking about? In Buddhism, there was no concept of an ego. There is the concept of self-possession and wisdom principle. So in that sense, the ego needs to be developed, for sure. The Buddha said there are qualities, the paramita or barami, the qualities of precepts, of fortitude, of patience, of concentration, of equanimity, of precepts. These need to be developed. And he said this over and over again, develop these good sides to your character. So the idea of being completely egoless makes no sense in Buddhism whatsoever. The Buddha did say the kind of thinking, who was I, what was I, having been what will I become, what should I do, what will I become doing this, what will happen, who was I, what kind of person was I, he said this kind of thinking has to be let go of. So that kind of ego self-identity it's quite common in the modern day to analyze yourself and like, well, I have this greed and I have this love and I have this tendency, I like art and I don't like animals, or, you know, all this kind of stuff is to be let go of. These are ego identities in Buddhism. As to anatta, this applied to sensory objects. So if you see something, that is not yourself. If you hear something, that sound is not yourself, because the sound comes and it disappears. But you don't say, I came and I disappeared. This is the exact words of the sutta, not my explanation. If you feel something in the body, normally you say, well, that's my feeling in my knee. But the meditator knows that a second ago I was thinking about pizza. Now I'm thinking about my painful knee. It's just come up. Now my mind goes on to something else. You don't say, I came up and I died. So any sensory object you can get, eye, nose, tongue, ear, body, or thought, because it's something that's a perception that's come up and it's a perception that will die, that is anatta. That is not yourself. So anatta was an adjective that was used to describe sense impression. It wasn't a theory of there is no self. That would be nattata, a theory of no self. This is anatta, the eye, the ear, the nose. That perception is not you. That's all it meant. So it had nothing to do with ego.
That's my understanding correct? That we have to do two things simultaneously. One is to discipline ourselves through the observation and the restraint of the 5 precepts. Then at the same time, we have to do this universal benevolence promihansi, metta, karuna,
It is, but unfortunately there are more than two. There's quite a lot of things we have to do at the same time. So a big part of Buddhism was this talk that you mentioned of restraint. And this does get lost a lot in modern day Buddhism. Some people say, well, you should do whatever you like. A lot of people I used to know when I was a layman, and they would take drugs. And for some reason they felt that their drug experiences were enlightenment. And so they all said, oh, I really respect Buddhism. Like, no, if you're taking drugs and you're getting spaced out, then that's not practicing Buddhism. And you may do it, you can still come back and practice Buddhism, but drugs and alcohol are not it. So we are practicing for wakefulness, for mindfulness, and restraint. And without restraint, there is no path. So that practicing of restraint is one thing. The practicing of developing good qualities, the paramita, you mentioned 4 pramavihara, which is loving kindness, universal compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. If you want to know about these, there's a particular formula in Buddhism, but these 4. But these are beautiful mind states, sobana citta. We practice beautiful mind states because it helps to stabilize. But then there is more practice to go, and the final practice is the emptiness. So you empty all of that out. You empty out even keeping the precepts, even the beautiful mind states, and move into what we'll call 3 practices. Emptiness, sunyata, desirelessness or signlessness. Now, signlessness means you don't get attached to any sensory object. It's actually the way that I practice myself. But these 3 practices were the higher practices because they lead to the final purification of mind. So that has to be done in order to get to enlightenment too. So yes, restraint, practicing the beautiful mind states, but the final practices are the emptying out. Yeah. Is that it? We all emptied out? Anyone else? Or are we ready to wrap up for the evening? You know what often happens is people sit there quiet and we say, okay, we'll finish. And then you will come up afterwards and ask the question. Which is fine too. I'm not in a hurry to leave. That's okay too. Yeah. Okay, last...
You mentioned past lives. Does that, when you say past lives, are you talking about if you were human now in this life, the likelihood you were human in your past lives, is that the same, or could it include any realm in the wheel of I'm not sure what it's called?
So in Buddhist... Right, so the question, just for the internet thing, is past lives refer to human, or does it refer to the whole wheel of becoming?
Animal or,
right.
You know, yeah.
So it's curious, when the Buddha talks about past lives, he always says that here I was born in this trade of this person, in this area of this thing, and he always refers to human lives. However, in Buddhist cosmology, the universe has devas that are very high, has beings in hell realms, has the animal realms and has the human realms. And these kind of get split up into more and more layers if you know them. So you have a hungry ghosts realm, you have a Sura guy, the angry deva realm. So beings get born into all different kinds of realms in the universe. However, of the books that I've read of past lives, I don't know, this is going slightly off Buddhism, but you may have, there's a book called Many Lives, Many Masters, or Many Masters, Many Lives, by a psychoanalyst who chanced upon past life regression and became an expert in regressing people. I'm not suggesting that you need to read this or believe it, but these books are out there. Was it Raymond Moody or somebody talked about it? So all of these people, they always, when they regress people, you only ever remember human lives. Maybe you don't remember the animal lives.
But when you talk about hungry ghosts, because there's another interpretation that, well, that's part of being human, or
Right.
you know, if you have a very addictive personality, or if you had a great life, you're a deva or a god or something, sort of in a phenomenological
Right.
sense. Is that part of?
Yeah, no, that's a modern day pseudo-psychology reinterpretation that people who don't like the idea of past lives, and it's fine not to like the teaching, by the way, there's no reason why you have to believe it or you have to like it. But please note that if you dislike it, you'll probably not believe it. Right? That one goes before the other. If you like it, you probably believe it. Note that your belief tends to follow whether you like something or dislike it. So there was a reinterpretation. It comes in large part from a Zen story. There's a man, a robber who breaks into a temple and he's breaking everything and stealing everything and killing the monks, and he comes to the abbot. How does it go? And he says, tell me the secrets to life and death, otherwise I'll slaughter you. And the monk says to him, you're an idiot, why should I tell you? You don't have the capacity to understand. So the man gets enraged and he's going to kill him with the sword. And the monk says, that's hell. And then the man realizes, and his mind becomes beautiful and peaceful, and he bows before the monk, and the monk says, that's heaven. So that was the idea, that heaven and hell are just states of mind. Which is true. You have heavenly states of mind and hellish states of mind. We've all experienced them. But no, the original teaching is categorically, these are realms within the universe. By the way, having those heavenly states of mind and hellish states of mind are what leads to those rebirths. So if you live a life of greed, then you get reborn as a hungry ghost. If you live a life of restraint, then you get born in a higher realm. There was a formula for it. If you are one who respects other people, in your next lifetime you'll be a leader. If you're one who's kindly to people, you'll be reborn as someone beautiful. If you are someone who doesn't kill animals, you'll be one who has a long and healthy life. So there was a direct correlation.
Maybe we can only remember the human ones, we can't remember the other ones, because we're human now.
Right. Could be. Yeah, I don't know.
But there seems to be like maybe a 20-year gap, so we go to the Bardos and we come back again.
Well, there was a curious question that came up after the Buddha passed away. And after you die, is there a limbo state before you get reborn? And this is a big question in Buddhism, and people have come to blows over this question, and monasteries have fallen out and written mean tweets and all kinds of things. And the official Theravada position actually came from a book called the Kathavatthu, which was written about 300-400 years after the Buddha passed away. And they raised all of these questions and then said which was the correct answer. But this was like 400 years after the Buddha, and the fact that this book is recording the questions shows that even at the time it was a serious question. So that question is there an in-between state between dying and getting reborn? And the official Theravada version was no, there can be no in-between state. You are immediately reborn. However, in Tibetan Buddhism, there is a number of in-between states. And everyone I know who has had these psychic powers and sees heavens and hells and relates it, they all say there is an in-between state. You get left in limbo, waiting for a rebirth. Anyway, for us as practitioners, our job is not to believe or disbelieve, because that's speculation. And the Buddha continually said, don't get into speculation. So it's an interesting question. We can have fun with it, but don't get too attached to it. And if you like it or you don't like it, just leave it alone. If you practice well, if you practice with restraint and order, and you put your house in order, you have precepts, you have some meditation, you can concentrate the mind, you have mindful awareness of what the mind is doing, you can be sure that after you pass away, if there is next lifetime, then you're in the good position to find a good rebirth. If you practice drinking and drugs and stupidity and mindlessness and unrestraint, you can be pretty sure that after you die you're going to fall into a difficult situation. Yeah. So we're out of time. Thank you all for coming. We just have a couple of announcements, then I'll do the blessing, and then we pack up for the evening.
Okay, announcements. First of all, thank you very much, Pandit, for giving another very interesting lecture. Thank you all for being here. Next week, Pandit will not be here. Next week we'll have the Dhamma Circle. That's a group of people that together they read a book about what Buddha thought, and they go through the book chapter by chapter, and they read it out together and then discuss it. It's a kind of a series of readings, but you can drop in for anyone. So if you haven't participated in one of the previous ones, you can still benefit from attending that one. And then the week after that, Pandit will be back again, and then the weeks after that, go to our website, go to our meetup, go to our Facebook, and you will find the announcement what's up next time. After the meeting, when you leave, you will notice, those who have been here before, they have been hearing me saying this many times, there are two donation boxes, one for Pandit and one for the Banali Foundation. And if you want to show your appreciation for what you heard today, you're free to put something in those boxes. And then last but not least, after we have closed down, it will be much appreciated if some of you would help us to clean up the room and put the chairs back where they belong. Actually, we could also use somebody, or maybe one or two people, who are willing to help us setting up the room, because quite a few of us who are doing this, some are sick, others are going on holiday, so we're really quite thin on the ground. So if a few people would come to me after the meeting and volunteer to help us setting up, that would also be much appreciated.
Or just come early if you're coming and help put the chairs out.
So what it implies is indeed coming early. Normally we arrive somewhere around 5:30. We get those seats from the balcony, set them up, get some chairs from downstairs, turn on the lights, turn on the airco, try to get the sound system going. If it's one or two people, it's light work. But we need some of those people more, because otherwise someday we cannot open the room. That will be a pity.
Okay, so I finish with the blessing. Sabitiyo vivachantu sabharogo inasatu mate bhavattvantarayo sukhi dikayuko bhava abhiva dhanasili sanichang vuddhapachayino chattaro dhamma vadanti ayuvano sukhang balang. Okay, good. By the way, I'll put a link on Facebook to the actual sutta that I was talking about today, so if you want to see the original, you can.